Across the channel, we've covered many disappearances that seem to occur under unusual circumstances, and often, these people leave no trace behind at all. If you follow David Paulides and the Missing 411 series, you'll know that he talks about a subset of people, specifically those that hold a high degree of intelligence. While I can't speak for the validity of his findings, I thought it would be interesting to put this to the test and to see if I could find and have a look at scientists who have gone missing under strange circumstances. All of the disappearances you will learn about in this video occurred in various places around the world in rural and wilderness areas. Now before we get into things, I want to clarify that I don't know if any of these cases have been previously reported by David or other researchers, or if any videos exist on these people. But it is my view that they fit the Missing 411 profile point in ways that you'll come to see. And there was a language barrier to overcome in two of the disappearances, which is always worth keeping in mind. All links to the references will be available in the description below, so do check that out if you want to do some further reading after the video. Now with that being said, these disappearances all occurred under unusual circumstances, or the findings were just very strange and perhaps even suspicious in some instances. From finding footprints which led to nothing, to being missing for a period of time before being found in an area already searched, and perhaps even outright lies being told. You can be the judge. Now let's explore the first disappearance, and to do that we're going to have to go back in time to 1980, China. From a very young age, Peng Jiamu was said to have a brilliant, curious mind. It seems that Peng was an individual who had an innate ability to absorb complex information, and he was able to process and reach an understanding in a way that many cannot. Peng was born in 1925 in the Guangdong province of China, and from a young age became fascinated with all things biology. Peng loved life and wanted to understand its deeper complexities, and he gained an infatuation of researching flora and fauna alike. Peng joined the Central University of China, known today as the Nanyang University, and he graduated in 1947, and was almost immediately offered a position in the Shanghai Institute of Biochemistry, presumably because he had already displayed a lot of passion and knowledge about the topic. The Chinese Academy of Sciences also took a liking to Peng and saw his skills as being indispensable, and they would have him join and lead several expeditions to Xinjiang, which is located in northwestern China. Peng's life didn't only consist of success though, and he did face some hardship. In 1957, he was diagnosed with a malign tumour, which he suffered with for quite some time. But thankfully, in the end, his treatment was successful and he made a full recovery in Shanghai. Over the years, it became clear that Peng didn't just have an intelligent mind, but he also came to be a competent outdoorsman as a result of all the time he was spending on these expeditions, hiking, camping, and having to use general survivalist skills. In 1980, the Chinese Academy of Sciences reached out once more to Peng to lead an expedition, and at the time, no one knew that this would be Peng's final trip. The 55-year-old biochemist was quoted as saying, "I have a strong wish to explore the frontiers. I have the courage to pave a way in the wilderness." This expedition would see Peng leading a team in the expanse of the Lopnor Desert, located in the Xinjiang region. As you might imagine, this was a largely uninhabitable area with a mostly infertile landscape consisting of sand dunes and a salt-encrusted basin where the Tarim Lake once resided. At this time, Peng was the vice president of the Xinjiang branch of the academy, and this trip would see him lead a team of chemists, geologists, biologists, and archaeologists in the summer of 1980. Peng's role in this trip was to measure the amount of potassium in this mineral-rich area. I'm not entirely sure why this was the case though, or what the goals were. Before his disappearance, he also managed to discover over a dozen new wild species, though it's not clear what they were. Just for some context, Lop Nor is around 2,500 feet above sea level and covers an area of around 1,160 square miles. The road that the team were travelling was easy going at first, but days into their travels, it quickly transitioned into sand dunes and jagged gravel. The group began to run low on supplies, though the only major concern was water, but Peng was determined to continue on. 5 days after Peng made the decision to continue on the 17th of June 1980, Peng left a note in his tent telling his teammates that he went to retrieve some water, only he would never return. When word reached Beijing, top officials in the central government were said to have been very frustrated. I can actually imagine that to be true too. Beijing's government structure is very top-down heavy, and a culture of punishing the messenger exists there. So people hate being the ones to deliver bad news, as was the case here with Peng. There are a whole range of factors for this behaviour, but one major one is that the ruling party over there hates to be embarrassed, both on the world stage and internally. And they hate others knowing of their own misfortune or failures, which they considered this to be. Upon learning of Peng's disappearance, they launched a large-scale search operation with heavy military involvement and oversight, along with making the investigation highly visible to the public to let their people know that they were throwing their resources at finding Peng. The military put boots on the ground at the location of the group's campsite, and they set up supply lines so that the search could be concentrated for some time. When searches on the ground came up fruitless, over 10 military planes and helicopters were dispatched to fly over the area, but Peng could not be located. 6 police officers were brought in who were part of a specialised search dog unit, but they too couldn't find Peng. It's not clear for how long the search continued, but at some point it was called off and a second investigation began in November of 1980, but as far as I can tell, that search was also fruitless. I did some further digging on this case, and I actually came across something that I find to be highly unusual that was reported by the Arlington Heights Daily Herald of suburban Chicago. On the 16th of October 1981, they reported this. Chinese radio and television carried lengthy reports Thursday saying Peng passed away while searching for water. To save transportation costs for the state, Peng started out to find water by himself in 120 to 150 degree heat on June 17. After making 4 large-scale searches through the area, authorities in Xinjiang province found Peng's footprints, his sugar ration coupons, and signs he sat down at a point 6 miles northeast of where he was last seen. It is concluded that Peng lost his way, then sat puzzling on the ground and was eventually buried by strong winds blowing sand. That, to me, sounds very strange. Peng travelled 6 miles. When his search for water was clearly failing, did he not think to turn back? It also sounds to me like they found his final position when his footprints seemed to lead to a place where he sat down and the footprints went no further. Surely a dig at or near to that spot would have uncovered his body if he was there. The reporting also seems very inconsistent to me. The Chinese press reports were saying that they believed that the sand had buried him, but they could still see his footprints, sugar ration coupons, and the place he sat down. Something is absolutely not adding up there. How could he have been buried, but not the rations, the footprints, and the signs of sitting? What happened to Peng here? It's worth mentioning that the Chinese public found this disappearance to be very strange and they wouldn't let it go. It seems to me that because it was highly publicised and everyone knew about it, rumours began to spring up surrounding Peng. On the 12th of October 1980, the Yuma Sun reported this. The expedition's base camp was in the area of Lop Nor, a nearly dry salt lake and reportedly a site of secretive Chinese tests. Letters quoted in the Hong Kong newspaper speculated that the United States intelligence may have been involved in Peng's disappearance. It's worth mentioning that the ruling party over in China often blame America for things, so I suppose that this accusation isn't too surprising. Or is there something more to the accusations? On the same day, the Joplin Globe reported this. The Hong Kong newspaper quoted the scientist's acquaintances as saying Peng Jiamu was seen September 14 at a restaurant in Washington. It's reported that a man denied being Peng and left quickly. The newspaper said that Peng was seen by friends including Deng Xifang, son of Deng Xiaoping, one of several Chinese vice premiers. The newspaper quoted letters from 2 visiting Chinese scholars, including one who had known Peng for 30 years, saying that he recognized him at the restaurant and later told Chinese authorities of the meeting. That went to places that I wasn't quite expecting and were left with some things to unpack. Before that though, it's important to clarify that the Chinese authorities' official position was that Peng had been buried in the sand there. First of all, I can find no hard evidence that Peng was in Washington on the 14th of September, nor can I find any evidence or mention of him being involved with the US. Though that's not to say that he wasn't, just that I can't find any evidence to indicate that he was. It seems to me that one of 2 things could have happened here, and I make no allegations. Either he was in some capacity defecting or planning to defect to the US and the Chinese authorities caught wind of this and took him from the campsite. Or Peng did go out for some water and something happened to him whilst doing so. The fact that Peng was highly spoken of and held a high position in the academy and was literally leading an expedition doesn't scream to me that he was a defector. I think that his actions contradict that statement somewhat at the very least, but of course we can never know that for sure. What could have happened here is that because the people of China wanted answers in regards to his disappearance, it is not impossible that the story of defection was concocted to change the people's perceptions of Peng, and to make them dislike him because the authorities weren't completely sure as to what had happened and couldn't come up with anything that would appease the public. Of course, I want to make it completely clear that those 2 scenarios are speculation and we have absolutely no idea what happened to Peng or where he ended up, but his disappearance was certainly unusual to say the least. A big problem when it comes to the ruling party in China is that it is incredibly difficult to ascertain what is actually happening because they are incredibly secretive and hard to trust. I want to make it clear though that I am specifically talking about the ruling party and not China in general, nor the Chinese people. In any case, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this one. What happened to Peng Jiamu? Now at this point, let's travel to Germany, 1994. Ernst Priestner wasn't actually German, but was born in Austria and similar to Peng was fascinated with biology from an early age. Specifically, Ernst took an interest in butterflies and Hymenoptera, which, if I've even pronounced that correctly, is a large order of insects comprised of the sawflies, wasps, bees and ants. To date, we know of over 150,000 species that fit within this order. Unfortunately, not a lot is known about Ernst's early life, but what we do know is that he attended a high school in Klagenfurt. From what I can gather, Ernst excelled in school and after graduating he went straight to the University of Vienna. Professors there saw something in Ernst and for his thesis he was guided by some of their very best minds at the Zoological Institute, and in 1959 he would be known as Dr. Priestner, gaining his PhD. Ernst wasn't your run-of-the-mill scientist, but actually ended up becoming a pioneer in the field of pheromones. It's silly, but these days you've got to be very careful about the way you describe things on YouTube, so let's just say that in terms of insects, pheromones are chemicals that are secreted or excreted that trigger a social response. Or the birds and the bees, if you catch my drift. Ernst was a leader in the field when it came to his understanding of this area, and he published many works that are still cited today. In 1983, Ernst received an award for his research in the pheromone field, and he would be the driving force in the study of synthetically produced pheromones, which he actually used to attract and discover new species that had never been seen previously. It's clear that Ernst had found his niche, and it's probably fair to say that he was one of the most knowledgeable people on the planet on the topic. This leads us to July of 1994, when Ernst travelled to the mountains in the Bavarian Alps to check some of his insect traps. Only this is a trip he would never return from. Though he didn't just fail to return, he somehow managed to disappear without a trace, and almost 26 years have passed since that time, and no sign of him has ever been found. Ernst's colleagues at the Institute for Behavioral Physiology in Sweden stated this: "Our member, Dr. Ernst Priestner, was on a routine inspection tour of his pheromone traps in the German Alps on the 19th and 20th of July 1994, but he has not returned." Despite multiple searches by mountain rescue and colleagues, it can only be assumed that he suffered a fatal accident. Our sympathy goes to the bereaved, especially his wife. On the 1st of October 1994, the Melanargia newspaper reported this: "We received news that Dr. Ernst Priestner has been missing in the Bavarian Alps since mid-July this year. He is still missing, and intensive searches, including mountain rescue, helicopters and dog squadrons to this day, have never been successful." The 60-year-old who was investigating insects got lost on the mountain in the German Alps. Over 200 rescue workers were already there, but had been unsuccessful. The institute where Dr. Priestner works are hoping that hikers or mushroom hunters who may have seen Ernst come forward with new information. Unfortunately, that's where the paper trail ends as far as I can tell, and I couldn't find any further mention of him. However, it would have been interesting to know if Ernst had actually reached his insect traps. The reports never indicate if they looked as if he had tampered with them, though that might not have been clear since he could have reset them or had left them in place if they hadn't yet been successful. So ultimately, we have no idea if he reached his destination or if something had happened to him on his way there or on his way back down. There was no evidence of foul play or animal predation, and it doesn't appear that Ernst had any enemies. During the time of searching, the dogs never picked up Ernst's scent, and the helicopters never saw any indications of where he might have gone. It's also important to clarify that Ernst was walking up the mountain and was not climbing or doing anything particularly dangerous at the time. Did he simply get lost, have an accident, or both? It's worth mentioning that Ernst knew this mountain well and had been conducting research there for a long time and had made many trips to his traps previously. As his peers stated, this was nothing more than a routine trip for Ernst. His colleagues showed surprise when he disappeared, and all anyone could come up with was that he must have faced some sort of accident. In this instance, I was quite surprised that the dogs never found his scent at any point, because as discussed in my previous video, they are said to have a successful find rating of around 75%. If Ernst was still in the area, you would think that the dogs would have been able to follow his scent, or at least have shown an interest somewhere in the area, but they didn't. This poses the question, was he even still in the area? And if not, then where did he go? As said, even 26 years later now, no trace of Ernst has ever been found. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any more information or even a follow-up on Ernst. So with that, let's move on to the next disappearance, and for this one, let's fast forward to more recent times. Prior to her disappearance, Natalie Christopher was a researcher with the European University in Cyprus in Nicosia. Natalie was a person who loved to inspire others and was very passionate about her work. In her own words, she worked to develop our understanding on the evolution of galaxies by fitting models to data collected from telescopes and satellites. She had plans to teach astronomy to others and was going to visit schools with the hopes of bringing inspiration to the children. Natalie also had a passion for running and had been doing this frequently since she was 12 years old. She said, "Aside from studying the beautiful universe we live in, I love running. In fact, I don't think that I could survive without running." She initially found inspiration from her sports teacher when she was 12 years old, and she said that this teacher changed her life for the better. Natalie was a very fit person, and she said that she had many wonderful memories of representing the track teams both at Durham University and the University of Oxford. During her studies, she would often compete in the 100 metres, 200 metres and the 100 metre hurdles. This brings us to the 5th of August 2019 when Natalie, who was now 35 years old, disappeared. Natalie was an astrophysicist and was educated at Oxford, which is very highly regarded. Astrophysics is a branch of astronomy that employs the principles of physics and chemistry to ascertain the nature of astronomical objects. Unlike astronomy in general, this field is not so interested in coordinates or motion, but more specifically the nature of objects, their composition, where they came from, etc. She was a highly intelligent individual who also loved her fitness and enjoyed hiking and running in outdoor areas, which is precisely what she was doing when she disappeared. Natalie lived in Cyprus with her 38-year-old Cypriot boyfriend, Kyriakos. While Natalie was born in London, she ended up moving to Cyprus at some point in her life and by all accounts was very happy there. The pair were on their final day of their holiday visiting the Greek island of IKARIA, and on the morning of the 5th, Kyriakos reported that he had woken up in their hotel room alone. Kyri called her and she told him that she had gone for an early morning run and that she would be back at the hotel shortly. He didn't think much else of it and started the day himself. He began to grow worried though when after a few hours had passed she still hadn't returned, and at this point he began to call her but she never answered the phone again. Not liking the situation, he quickly reported Natalie missing to the police, and after hearing the circumstances, a search was immediately organised and underway. The authorities employed the help of Natalie's phone provider and they were able to trace its signal to the southeastern coast of IKARIA after pinging it. Unfortunately, they couldn't locate her right away, and 2 days later, the police confirmed that her phone was now switched off, though it wasn't clear if it had just run out of battery or if it had been turned off. The search for Natalie was growing in intensity and helicopters alongside firefighters had been deployed to help search the area. The authorities extensively searched 2 running routes in the area that they believe she could have gone down, but they didn't find anything to indicate Natalie's presence. At this point, there were hundreds of search crews scouring the area for Natalie, and more details were coming out. Greek papers reported that the police were investigating stains on the pillow in their bedroom, but Natalie's boyfriend said that Natalie suffered from nosebleeds a lot, and that's what it was attributed to. Of course, I'm absolutely certain that the police suspected otherwise, or at the very least had suspicions, even if they didn't state it publicly. At the same time, a hotel maid told authorities that she heard voices in their room the night before she went missing, and stated that it sounded like they might have slept in separate beds, which could of course indicate that the pair had gotten into an argument. The employee said, "I heard some voices last night. When I checked in the room, I found that there was a sheet spread on the bedroom sofa, which may indicate that the couple was sleeping in separate rooms the other night." Though it's important to clarify that there was no hard evidence of a disagreement turning bad or anything of that nature. During the phone conversation, it was reported that Natalie told him that she was jogging uphill in a rocky part of the island and that she said that she couldn't go fast and that she would be back slowly, and told him not to worry, though of course she never returned. In contrast to the hotel employee, the owner of the hotel said that Dr. Christopher and Kyriakos were a nice couple and that there had been no signs of strife between the pair. Of Kyriakos, the hotel owner described him as a good lad, but he's lost and is panicked and couldn't believe that she's missing. After Natalie had gone missing, the hotel owner also housed Kyriakos outside of the hotel because the police wanted the room cordoned off. 2 days into the search, on the 7th of August 2019, the Sitka Daily Sentinel reported this. Police said that the body of Cyprus-based astrophysicist Natalie Christopher was found in a 20-metre deep ravine. Natalie had been reported missing on Monday by a Cypriot partner with whom she was vacationing after she went for a morning run. The cause of passing was not immediately clear and an autopsy was scheduled for Thursday. Rescuers told Greece's state ERT-TV that the woman appeared to have slipped and suffered fatal injuries while rock climbing. Perhaps I'm reading too much into that, but those two statements seem like they are directly conflicting. On the one hand, they state that the cause of passing was not clear, but they also state that the rescuers said it looked like she slipped and fell, suffering fatal injuries. I'm not really sure how the cause of passing wasn't clear while simultaneously stating that she had fatal injuries. Unless they're stating that they don't know which specific injury caused her to pass away. The location Natalie was found was approximately half a mile away from the hotel, and the authorities stated that it appears that Natalie may have plunged down the ravine when she attempted to climb the rocky cliffs without any equipment. One firefighter was said to have noticed some rocks which may have come loose during the suspected fall. Interestingly, this find seemed to place people into one of two camps. One camp argued that this was nothing more than an accident, while the other camp speculated that Natalie would never have tried to scale the rocks for no apparent reason with no equipment, and that she may have met with foul play or have been pushed in that direction because of a third party, animal or otherwise. People point to Natalie's intellect and outdoor knowledge, stating that she will have understood the dangers of climbing rocks and wouldn't have attempted that without good reason. Of course, it's also important to clarify that there was no evidence of a struggle or third-party involvement, other than the scene feeling very odd and out of character. More reports came out on the 8th, where authorities stated that she was found lying on her back, crushed beneath several large rocks. I'm still not sure that I understand the comments earlier made that the cause of passing was not clear. How can that be the case if she was found beneath large rocks? Or perhaps there were secretive suspicions that there was third-party involvement and they wanted to try to rule that out before reaching a conclusion, but that's not clear. Later on the same day, Coroner Nicholas Karakoukis stated that it appeared that the passing was of an accidental nature. When Natalie's body was found, Kyriakos was called to come and identify her. Rescuers on the scene reported that he had to be restrained by officers and he cried out in anguish for Natalie. One searcher said he was screaming and crying and tried to run up the track to be with her. He was distraught and pacing up and down and trying to get past the police. He wanted to see the body. I don't think that he could believe that she wasn't with us anymore. I saw him later and he had calmed down, but his face was completely white. I have never seen someone so drained of any colour. The coroner reasoned that Natalie had suffered from a massive head injury and believed that this was the cause of passing and that it was almost certainly an accident. Police and firefighters on scene said that it was likely that she fell while either trying to climb up or down a 13-foot cliff along the running trail. I must say that I can certainly see why two camps formed here. I can't think of a single reason as to why Natalie would stop running only to try to climb up or down a 13-foot cliff with absolutely no equipment at all. Not only did she try to either climb up or down the cliff, but search leader Kostas Markakis said that there had been lots of rain over the prior months which had caused rocks to become unstable. He added, "The rocks in the area are very loose after we had a bad winter with lots of rain. They are not stable, all the people know this and do not attempt to climb them. There must have been suspicions of foul play at some point because reports indicate that specialist forensic teams were sent down to the area to carry out fingertip searches and to take photographs of the positioning of the fallen rocks. Reports indicate that the teams were down there for around 3 hours trying to understand what had happened. The area in question was described as rocky and with thick undergrowth, and according to the dailymail.co.uk, the area where Dr. Christopher was ultimately found had been searched 3 times by rescue workers who hadn't seen her body. Odd, but as said, there was thick undergrowth present which could have obscured the body, unless she wasn't there those days prior when the area was searched initially the 3 times. Though none of that is clear, and Occam's razor would suggest that they had simply missed her, but some found it odd nonetheless, which I can appreciate. I've had to come back to edit this part in, but The Guardian may have cleared this up a bit. On the 9th of August 2019, theguardian.co.uk reported this. The search leader said that the search parties had unwittingly passed close to the site where Natalie's body was eventually discovered, barely a mile away from the studio apartment where she'd been staying. We had passed the spot at least twice, but the gorge was very deep and very difficult to access. We never expected that she could possibly be down there, he added. Natalie was partially obscured by a tree, but searchers eventually spotted her brightly coloured trainers. Costas said that it was difficult to make her out. The coroner stated that the cause would only be fully determined once an autopsy and toxicology tests had been conducted. Until that time, the police will not rule out the possibility that Natalie was pushed into the ravine and will continue to consider the case a criminal investigation. Given the Guardian's reporting there, it sounds more like the searchers may have just missed her instead of her not being present, though of course it's not like I can say that with any degree of certainty. It's also worth mentioning that search dogs were present and at no point did they find Natalie's scent as far as I can tell. If the search dogs had been near that ravine, then that would have been very unusual for them not to have found a scent or have shown interest, but of course I can't confirm if the dogs had been to that area or not. Also, that's the first time I'd actually seen it officially reported that the authorities were somewhat suspicious of the circumstances, which I'd earlier guessed was probably the case. Another interesting point to note is that the fireman described the ravine as basically inaccessible, though I'm not really sure what to make of that information, and I'm not sure if it helps to point in either direction, accidental or otherwise. Something that was never mentioned again was the phone. We know that the phone was still on until 5 PM on the 5th, which was the day that Natalie disappeared. It would have been very interesting to know if the phone was switched off, damaged, or if it had run out of power. The one part of this incident that strikes me as being completely off was the fact that Natalie seemed to attempt to climb or descend a 13-foot cliff. There surely must have been a reason for this, and while this is speculation, I just can't see it being a random act of curiosity. Could there have been a third party present, animal or otherwise, that pushed her in the direction of the cliff? Perhaps this third party could have been nearby, which caused Natalie to panic and she quickly tried to climb or descend the cliff to get away, resulting in the accident. Ultimately, I think that the reasoning behind the climbing attempt would help to explain what happened here, but unfortunately, it seems that we will never know why Natalie attempted the climb. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this one. What do you think happened to Natalie Christopher? Now at this point, we're going to finish with a disappearance that took place on the Indian border with China. Specifically, this incident occurred on Mount Nun, located in the Kashmir Himalayas. To be quite honest with you, I wasn't sure if I should even talk about this one, because the more I read about it, the more confusing the reports become, and ultimately, I've absolutely no idea what happened, but let's have a look. Thomas A. Murch was an American geologist and planetary scientist. He was a professor at Brown University in Rhode Island, and he was in that position from 1960 up until his disappearance in 1980. Thomas had actually led a very interesting and adventurous life, from being an active member of mountaineering clubs, followed by a stint in the South Korean military as an artillery officer. After this, he came back to the States where he acquired his PhD in geology. More specifically though, Thomas disappeared on the 6th of October 1980 while descending from Mount Nun. According to AmericanAlpineClub.org, Thomas passed away on October 6, 1980 at the age of 49 while descending from the summit of Mount Nun in northern India, following a bivouac above 21,000 feet with two former students on an expedition which he initiated and led. He was last seen on the morning of the 6th on a precarious ledge at the bivouac site above the steep northwest face of the mountain after a fall the previous day and the loss of a crampon needed to continue the descent. When one of his two companions, Tom Burnett, returned that evening with a spare crampon, Thomas was gone and only his ice axe remained. So, from what I can gather here, the team, or at least Thomas while descending, had a fall the prior day on the 5th, which left him stuck on a precarious ledge. Though, because of the fall, he lost one of his crampons, which meant that he couldn't make it down the rest of the way to his teammates. Presumably, Thomas's two companions tried to help the situation, but eventually Tim had to go retrieve another crampon because Thomas had no way of getting down with only one. When Tim returned on the evening of the 6th, Thomas was missing and only his axe remained on the ledge. I'm sure that there are lots of complexities here that we can't fully appreciate from that description. What was the second companion doing during this time? Clearly he didn't stay with Thomas, so did he accompany Tim? That's not clear in the slightest. But again, we probably have to assume that there are complexities here that we can't fully understand. Reports seem to conflict and get weird at this stage, so let's have a look at some official press reports. 5 days after Thomas disappeared, the Dover Times reporter stated this. According to reports received here today from the climbers' base camp, 370 miles to the north, Thomas Mudge, leader of a 7-member American expedition scaling the 23,000-foot Mount Nun in the Himalayas, passed away while making an assault on the summit. Mudge's body was brought to the town of Kargil from the base camp at Tangui. Following his passing on Tuesday, the United News of India reported. The domestic news agency gave no details of his passing, and his hometown in the United States was not immediately known. So we immediately have our first discrepancy. The American Alpine Club make no mention of Thomas ever being found, only that he had disappeared and that his ice axe was the only thing to remain. American press reports at the time of disappearance were mostly stating that his body was recovered and sent to Kargil. It's worthy of mention that newspapers in the US were reporting the same text basically word for word on the 11th and 12th. On October the 13th, Panama City News Herald brought some more information about Thomas to light. I quote, Thomas Mudge, an associated administrator of the US space program NASA, has passed away while leading a 7-member American expedition scaling the 23,000-foot Mount Nun in the Himalayas. The cause of his passing has not been disclosed. The article then repeats that Thomas's body was taken to Kargil, and all press reports are basically the same word for word on the 13th and 14th. On the 15th, press reports are still the same, only adding that details surrounding his passing are not known at this time. After some further digging, I found something absolutely weird, so let's get bizarre. I think it's probably best if I just read this press report out to you. On the 28th of October 1983, the Galveston Daily News reported this. New Delhi, India. 2 Polish climbers found the frozen body of an American climber who disappeared 3 years ago near the summit of a Himalayan peak, the Indian Mountaineering Foundation said Thursday. Thomas Mudge, 49, suffered a head injury while climbing the 23,000-foot Nun peak in India's Lak region. He vanished after his 2 companions went down to seek help. The foundation reported that the Polish climbers Boylan Agres and Pilak Jerzy found Mudge's body about 660 feet from the summit. His rucksack was still strapped to his shoulders, the climbers said. The 2 were unable to bring Mudge's body down from the mountain, but took several photographs to identify the victim and the location. Mudge, a Brown University geology professor who was on leave to work for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, was descending the mountain on October the 5th when he fell into a crevice. 2 companions pulled him free, but he was unconscious and they left him in a makeshift shelter to go for help. When they returned, Mudge was gone and they theorized that he had regained consciousness, tried to climb down and fell a second time. What? What was happening with the press reports the 3 years prior who were stating that Thomas's body had been taken to Kargil? Was that simply not true, and if so, why in the world was that being lied about? Or had they found a body that they believed to belong to Thomas but wasn't actually him? This quite literally cannot be any other kind of mistake, because the difference between having a body and transporting it and not having a body at all is perhaps among the most easily distinguishable things that can ever happen. Reports never indicate what kind of search was organised for Thomas, but I think that we have to assume that there was some sort of effort, given that the authorities knew about it and it was being reported on by the press. This news report also makes it clear that the second companion also joined him in retrieving help. Given that Tim returned the same evening with a spare crampon, that could mean that the second companion made his way to civilization to notify the authorities and to get help. When Tim came back, Thomas was no longer there, and the only thing remaining was his ice axe, so where did he go? Again, I think we have to assume that there was some sort of search effort, which presumably would have been localized beneath the ledge that he was on. The question is, was he actually found then and there and transported to Kargil, or was he missing for the next 3 years until his frozen remains were found by the Polish climbers? And if that is the case, then how did that even happen? And why was false information being reported? I actually find myself siding with the Galveston Daily News report because they cite the Indian Mountaineering Foundation who reported the discovery of the find, and I just don't see what motivation they could have had to report and lie about finding a missing person. The paper trail goes cold here as far as I can tell. What in the world happened to Thomas Mudge? Did he simply fall that day for a second time off the ledge, and if so, why couldn't he be located after that? Or was he located and transported to Kargil? Or was he literally missing for 3 years after that? Good actual lord, you're gonna have to leave your thoughts about this one. What even happened here? I just wanted to say a big thank you to my patrons who are really helping this channel a lot, so thank you very much for your continued support. And thank you for watching. If you found the video interesting, then please do leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, it helps me a lot. And if not, then feel free to leave a dislike. I'm just looking for your honest opinions, so do share. And do share your thoughts on the disappearances discussed. I hope that you've had a great day, or evening depending on where you are. Be safe guys, and I'll see you next time. Peace.